right, if you're watching these notes when you're supposed to be in order, we just finished our lesson 7.5 on trying to figure out and understand why the Aztecs performed human sacrifice rituals and putting that into the context of their society. So this topic is 7.6. The goal is for you to be able to analyze how the Aztec religious beliefs gave meaning to human sacrifice, helped justify imperial power, and created those structural vulnerabilities in the empire. So the Aztec Empire starts centuries after the collapse of the classical Maya period. For reference, here are some of the things going on while the Aztec are building and maintaining their empire. So just before the Aztec established Tenochtitlan and their empire, just a few decades before that, Mansa Musa has completed his Hajj to Mecca. The Mali Empire is going strong. You have the Huan dynasty with the Mongols controlling China coming to its end, and Great Zimbabwe is also coming to its end around the same time. Let's talk about the problem faced by the Aztecs. So their capital city was a place known as Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan can be seen right here, and you'll notice it's on an island in the middle of this very large lake called Lake Texcoco. Now, this lake is actually pretty shallow. It's not deep like Lake Michigan or anything. And the area around the lake was actually already controlled by other rival civilizations, other rival groups. And so the Aztec, the Mexica as they call themselves, had to build their civilization on this island. There's a whole long story about why this is, and actually ties into why the Mexican flag has an eagle sitting on top of a cactus with a snake on top of it. So to put this into context, you have to understand how the Mexica, or Aztec as we call them today, where they say they came from. So the Mexica people, they were actually rather nomadic. They didn't have a home city at first. They told stories that they had migrated out of a mythical homeland known as Aztlan, and then for one reason or another they left it, and they're kind of wandering around, and they're hiring themselves out as mercenaries. They wind up hiring themselves off to be soldiers for a local king of a small city on the edge of Lake Texcoco. They kill the king's daughter and wind up getting chased into the lake, where they say that there was the prophecy that they would know whether to build their new homeland, the new city, when they saw an eagle sitting on top of a cactus with a snake on it. And when they were chasing the lake, they saw that right here on these islands, and that's where they said they were going to build their city. Now, this led to some problems for them because the lake is very shallow. It's also pretty marshy environment, right? The land is pretty much mud. Anything that's going to be built on top of it is going to sink down unless you can solve that problem first. Not to mention, you're kind of surrounded by potential enemies. So how do you build a capital city of a massive empire in a situation like this? This is something they had to overcome. This also leads to other problems, like how do you build a powerful state, a powerful government in a region with very limited farmland? After all, they're on a kind of small island in the middle of a shallow lake. How are they going to guarantee enough food for their population? How are they going to handle rapid population growth in and around the city of Tenochtitlan? They're going to need to feed these large amounts of people, control them, and unify a large number of people who disagree. They don't necessarily share the same belief systems. They don't necessarily think the Aztecs should be in charge. Another problem they had to solve was the fact that, unlike what's happening over in Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire, there was no massive old empire they could inherit legitimacy from. They couldn't say, I'm in charge because I'm inheriting the power of this previous empire that was once here. Instead, they kind of have to figure out a different way to justify why they get to be in charge. Let's take a look at how they solved their engineering problems first. So, on the island, they, again, very muddy, very marshy land. Any building, like giant stone structures like this, are going to sink down into the ground and not even necessarily sink evenly, which means they might sink deeper on one side than the other, and then it'll topple over and fall over. So they solved this problem by driving wood pilings down into basically large pieces of trees. They would drive down into the mud, and they would then surround it with stones and dirt and other things to create a solid structure. And they did this in such a way in order to support these massive stone temples and buildings at the heart of their city. And so that's one solution they came to. Then they created wide raised paths with drawbridges, right? It's a marshy, kind of muddy area. So they created these giant wooden paths and raised roads, essentially, that would then go out across the lake and connect to the mainland in order to help them, get off of their island. And they also had drawbridges that could be brought up in case of invasion, so you couldn't get onto their island easily with an army unless, they had the drawbridges down and they wanted you to do so. And then throughout their island, they created these canals. So it was actually like a way to have canoes to quickly travel through the city, as well as footpaths along the side. And so this allowed people to quickly navigate the city once they're inside it. And as far as supporting a large population through food and having not enough land to live on, they actually were quite ingenious with this, creating a system known as chinapas, or man-made islands in the shallow lake. So you can see here kind of a diorama rendering of it. Here's a diagram. Here's a map from the period just after the Spanish arrived, showing how this works. So essentially what they would do is that they would pull up dirt from the bottom of the shallow lake, and then they would put these reed structures around it to hold that dirt together, and then they would plant willow trees, you can see here, right, at the edges of it, and the roots would grow down, anchoring it to the bottom of the lake, and then pulling up more fertile soil that could be used to grow food. You'll notice that the canals then kind of go through it to allow for canoe-based transportation, but there are also these footpaths along the edge as well for quick movement. You'll also notice if you look at this diagram that there's houses, right? This is a farmer's house. People are living on these chinapas and working on it. And this is not just a great way to build extra land and convenient ways of navigating through your city. It's when you farm this way, it's actually highly productive, and it allowed them to produce multiple harvests within one season, which provided more food to support a larger population. So they took this problem of living on a marshy island and they actually turned that into a strength by expanding out the land, building these chinapas, and then using that as fertile soil for growing food to support their large population. Another problem that they had living on the shallow lake was the fact that they're living on a shallow lake. Like, what happens if there's flooding? It's going to wash away their city and their crops. That can be a problem. So they actually created dike systems and locks, essentially to control the water level of the lake. You can see right here that this is a giant man-made dike system that was designed to basically, if this area of the lake was rising in water levels, it wouldn't flood out these islands that Tenochtitlan and the rest of the Aztecs were living on. Then they also had, you need fresh water in order to drink and everything else. Like the Romans, they built an aqueduct system that brought massive amount of fresh water into the city. Here you can see this is a two-channel system, essentially, that they use, so they could close down one channel to clean it and you have maintenance on it, while the other channel would still be supplying water to the city. And within the city itself, they also had large markets that allowed people to buy and sell and trade with each other, so people could get the resources they needed to survive. And this was all done under the watch of government officials to make sure that all trades were happening fairly, no one was getting cheated, no one was stealing, things like that. So this helped create order and trust to allow for trade to happen. But still, these islands are pretty limited. They don't have enough space that they need. So their solution is military conquest to conquer the areas around them. But, as we've talked about in class, right, Tenochtitlan right here, this is the immediate area around Lake Texcoco that they control, but they don't decide to control everything directly. Instead of creating a direct empire where the emperor tells everyone in the larger area of the empire what to do, they create a tributary empire. This is where basically they control directly this area in orange, but these areas in this lighter tan color, these are tributary areas. So there are other cities, other peoples who are allowed to technically govern themselves independently as long as they sent offerings on a regular basis to the Aztec, to the Mexica. They had to send cotton for clothing, cacao, which is where we get chocolate from, and they made religious drinks from it, jade, which they used for carvings and decorations, maize, food, feathers that they used for all kinds of decorative armor and clothing for the emperors and the noble families and the priest class. So in exchange for not being directly conquered, they just said, keep paying these taxes to us, and we're going to let you do what you want, but you're going to have to pay these high taxes. They also, as we said, left some areas unconquered that they used for their flower wars, essentially these religious ceremony wars where they would go in and they would capture people in combat in order to use for their sacrificial practices. So through all this, their empire grew stronger by extracting wealth or taking resources from the territories that surrounded them rather than directly controlling them and forcing them to do everything the way the Aztecs do it. So if you think about it, the deal they were basically offering is that you in these surrounding areas, we're going to pretty much leave you alone, as long as you pay us, these taxes to us. They're going to be pretty high, pretty steep, but you might not like them, but it's better than being our enemies, where we're going to go to war with you, and then when we fight you at war, we're going to capture your soldiers and sacrifice them to our sun god, Quetzalcoatl. So, high taxes, but it's better than having your heart ripped out of your chest. So, not a terrible deal, but also doesn't really instill loyalty to the Aztec people. You can see where the Maya, right, justified their power by belief systems, right? The kings are in charge because of their connections to the gods. The Aztec more were kind of keep control of their tributary areas through violence and fear. So all these tributes from the surrounding areas flowed into the city of Tenochtitlan, and this wealth and these resources really supported the upper classes, the elites, the people at the top of the social hierarchy. So the emperors, the priests, the nobles, the soldiers. It also supplied all the resources needed for their elaborate ceremonies. And it really also created incentives for expansion. If you wanted to keep supporting these upper classes, you could either tax the people directly under your direct control in Tenochtitlan, but those are the people who are living around your palace and they might revolt, or you expand and conquer new tributary areas, bring more wealth in. And so this economic success of the Aztecs was tied to their conquest. This is a similar problem that we saw happen with the Romans, right? In order to bring in more money to support your empire, you had to conquer more areas, but then that puts more pressure to continue to expand, which is very expensive. Then you have to hold that territory, which requires you to have a large army. You see the problem here. Now, like the Maya, the Aztec did use belief as a justification system for their power. The Maya, again, had a religious worldview that you needed to offer blood to the gods. Sometimes it did require human sacrifice, but more often than not, it was just simple bloodletting rituals, sometimes more complex bloodletting rituals. The Aztec, on the other hand, they had a religious worldview that linked survival of the universe to human sacrifice specifically, not just bloodletting, but a sacrifice of human beings. They believed that their gods needed this nourishment to keep the world alive. And as we studied in class, right, their origin myth story of where humans came from, the role of the sun, the gods actually ripped their own hearts out as an offering to create mankind, and so this is why we need to do the same for them. Now, the Aztec rulers claimed they had power over others because they said they had a special relationship with the gods, and so they needed to be the one in charge. They needed to keep doing this in order to maintain cosmic order, this balance between the powers of light and the powers of darkness. So it's through this lens that their sacrificial practices are actually framed as a necessity for the survival of everyone, not a cruelty, right? Is it better to, let everyone die or sacrifice a few? That's kind of the calculus that they're doing with their religious belief system. And the violence of this system, right, whether it's going and conquering other areas, doing the human sacrifices, it was given meaning through this belief. Religion helped explain why there is inequality in society, right? I have more than you because I have a connection to the gods that is necessary to keep the world going. Those tributes that we're demanding the people around us give us are necessary to keep the world from ending. War, human sacrifice, all this is necessary for the survival of the world. So ritual and political authority are deeply connected in the Mexica, the Aztec culture. The rulers presented themselves as chosen by the gods, and public rituals reinforced obedience and fear. I mean, imagine seeing the sacrifices on top of these temples as everyone's looking up and the body tumbles down. This is in the middle of everyone's daily life, right near the shopping centers, as you're canoeing down to your farm field, your house, right? You're going downtown, in the middle of religious festivals with millions of people surrounding you, all watching the same thing. So this sacrifice demonstrates power over life and death that the rulers have, and these religious festivals really strengthen the loyalty in the capital to those who are performing these rituals. And as violent as these sacrifices were, this system does work. It works for several reasons. The tribute provided by the areas that they conquered and they made part of their tributary empire created a steady flow of resources into the city of Tenochtitlan, which supported their rule over their people. The resources themselves supported the Aztec elites and reinforced that inequality, right? There is incentive for those in the top of the social hierarchy to keep this going because this is where you're getting your food, this is where you're getting all your valuable resources, your luxury items. It's all coming from the tribute that you're forcing the other areas to pay to you in exchange for it not being, turned into these sacrifices. In turn, a lot of resources then also flood into the Aztec markets in Tenochtitlan, and they become major economic centers where people from all over can come and trade. The people within Tenochtitlan can buy the resources they need, and so it does keep the bellies of the people, fairly full. And the religion itself also creates a shared meaning within Aztec society, right? This isn't violence for the sake of violence or violence for the sake of control. This is violence and religious rituals for the sake of keeping cosmic order together, to keep the world from ending. So there's a meaning behind it more than just do this or I will hurt you. Beyond the sacrifices, their religious beliefs influenced everyday activities such as childbirth rituals, how they got their names, festivals that brought the community together that didn't necessarily involve sacrificial rituals. The community itself will have rituals that reinforce those shared values and obligations to each other and to the emperor and the priest class who's necessary for keeping cosmic order. And this belief was practiced daily, not just during these large public ceremonies. This doesn't mean they were daily committing human sacrifice, but the religious rituals that reinforced the belief system that required these sacrifices, those daily rituals were happening in small families across the Tenochtitlan, in their homes, in the fields, and so it all kind of reinforced this larger belief structure, which itself supported the rule of the emperor and the elites. So these rituals reinforced hierarchy and authority, right? The people on top are on top because of their ability to connect with the gods, their ability to perform rituals that keep the gods strong and happy and able to keep the sun rising, the crops growing, people fed. And military successes of the Aztec army also leads to prestige and control. By that I mean, as the Mexica army, the Aztec army conquers or wins fights, wins flower wars to gather harvests of people to sacrifice, this is seen as something people can take pride in. After all, just look at the American tradition of pride in the military, right? The hoorah-rah, we support the troops. Military success is something that people can feel they're a part of. It creates pride within the culture, showing how dominant they are. But all this success creates pressure to maintain the power. There's a constant need for food, resources, and labor because they need to feed a larger and larger population. They need more resources because as you get more resources, you get this hunger for more luxurious goods. And to build these monumental structures, you need more people who are able to do that labor. You can force to do the building. So managing the conquered areas, there are different regions. Well, they also have different cultures and different loyalties. And so while your belief system may keep the people loyal to this structure, this social hierarchy in the city of Tenochtitlan or in the Aztec core, the tributary areas, well, they may not necessarily believe that there is a need for so much human sacrifice to keep the gods strong. And so that belief system, while strengthening the core, not a great way to keep the tributary areas in line. And ruling that large population without a modern bureaucracy, that is, professional workers whose job it is to carry out the duties of government, that's really, really difficult to do. When all this is going on, right, they want to prevent rebellion. People don't necessarily like being tributary states. Some people may not be happy with the fact they may be captured and turned into a human sacrifice victim. And some people may not be happy with just the rule of the emperors and the priests in general. And so they have to expand their influence over more people at the same time trying to prevent rebellion from the people they already control. And this creates kind of pressure pain points within the Mexica, the Aztec culture. All this also has hidden costs, right? The heavy tribute burden placed on the conquered peoples, well, this creates resentment among the subject regions because they don't like having to give up all these resources to the Aztec. They don't like the idea that if they don't give up these resources, they may be turned into, another area subject to flower wars. And so that resentment builds and grows and makes them, just looking for their opportunity to strike back and break away. And loyalty based on fear and obligation is not a shared identity, right? These tributary areas, they're not allied with the Aztec core simply because, they share a sense of belief or they take pride in this culture that the empire they're part of, like many Romans took pride in being part of the Roman Empire. Instead, their loyalty to the Aztec emperor was based on fear and obligation. They didn't want to be subject to military raids. And the constant need for them to expand to sustain the system put an ever greater stress on the culture and their resources. That drive for continued expansion to support the system that's built, we saw that with the Roman Empire, and that's one of the things that eventually caused them to collapse as they were stretched too thin. This all creates what we call structural vulnerabilities, things that are baked into the system that makes it weaker, that gives it a chance for it to all fall apart, right? The empire is dependent on this continuous cycle of conquest. Religious legitimacy is weakened if these sacrifices fail to bring success, right? You're saying we need to rip out human hearts in order to keep the sun god happy so that he's strong enough to fight the forces of darkness and keep the crops growing, and then the crops fail for some reason. That kind of undercuts your whole argument. The people who are subjected to this also have strong incentives to resist or defect, right? They're not there because they want to be there. They're not part of the empire because they want to be part of the empire. They're not really getting anything from the Aztec, and this creates that incentive for them to find ways to resist being part of it. And if someone else comes along that gives them a chance at kind of being part of something different, they might take that chance. And again, this whole system is propped up by the military dominance of the Aztec warriors, and this power structure can quickly collapse if belief in the religious system that underpins the whole thing, or the surrounding areas no longer feel the Aztec have military dominance. Well, that's just pulling the rug out from the whole thing. So if the belief fails, or the surrounding areas no longer think that the Aztecs are the big guys on the block, the tough guys that can't be beat, the system is going to fail. So what the story of the Aztec or the Mexica really reveals to us is that violence can be normalized through belief systems, right? This was, for the Aztec, part of what they believed was necessary for the universe. It justified their actions. And alongside of this mass violence of human sacrifice, people were still living very normal lives within Tenochtitlan despite the violence of the system. It just shows that a lot of people are willing to kind of look the other way at violence that's being done by the system they're part of, as long as that violence is not being directed at them. I mean, you can think of the Jim Crow South in the United States, or even the northern states of the United States during the Jim Crow era, or segregation and racism. Large swaths of the U.S. population was able to look the other way at the violence being done to African Americans, simply because that violence wasn't being done to them, and so they could look the other way because the system allowed them to live a comfortable life at the expense of the violence being done to others. And I think that's an important lesson to learn and to look out for when we're studying the world around us. Economic extraction can also build power very, very quickly, right? The Aztec burst onto the scene and quickly built a powerful and strong, wealthy empire by taking the resources from others. That is another thing we're going to see repeatedly through history. Is we're going to see European empires rise quickly and extract resources from their colonies in order to grow quickly and sustain a powerful empire. And systems based on fear and tribute also carry a very, very high risk. People aren't loyal to you because they necessarily believe in you. The people in the outlying areas are only loyal because they're afraid not to be, and not paying the tribute the consequences is too high. That's not going to build long-term stability. So the anchor question that I'm going to kind of leave you with here is that if power depends on fear, belief, and constant expansion, how stable can that system really be? How long can it last if the whole thing is built on your people being afraid of you, or people believing that you have this connection to the gods, or the need to constantly expand into new areas to pay for everything that supports your system? How stable can this be? Or will a strong wind come and knock over the whole house of cards? And that's where I'm going to leave you with the Aztec. As usual, rewrite today's goal from the top of the paper so you remember what it was you should get out of this lesson. 3 important facts, ideas, complete thoughts that you learn. And as always, that one question you have so that I can respond and help you better understand this topic. The psychology is there. If you do this, it's going to help you remember this story. All right, until next class, I'll see you then.